Hello. I'm gonna turn that down. Okay. I've got some Irish breakfast tea, which is delicious. We're gonna crack open The Gathering Dark from chapter 4. And we gotta get our music on. That should be good. When Jam gets in here, they'll tell me if it's too loud. So, it'll be alright. There we go. Alright. Chapter 4. When we last left off from our friend Joda, he had sneaked out of the city that he was just about to be executed in to a different city that was currently under quarantine. And he was, let's see, he was serving as a late-night delivery boy for potions from a supposed witch. But the church never really, quote-unquote, never caught on. That is until Joda started sprinkling magic into the potions so that they would actually work. And then as soon as the church realized that the potions worked, they blamed the old lady for witchcraft. And as far as I'm aware, that's where we've left off. Let's see. Oh, okay. He enlisted in the Ged army, and within a week, when the plague flag was finally pulled down, he was marching with a military unit north toward Aslor. Okay. And with that, let's begin. I just gotta find a way to get comfortable. 550. God damn it. Oh, come on. Okay. Alrighty. Nice and relaxed. Okay. Chapter 4. Oh, I should probably change the scene. There we are. Chapter 4. Spoils of War. The city-states of the Dark were autonomous, independent entities, each one vying for power against the others. There were 12 major city-states and a host of minor ones throughout the period of the Dark. All of them maintained their own armies, often at great expense. Early historians state that this was to fight the goblins, but in actuality most of their battles were against other city-states. The church, more concerned with spiritual matters and willing to see the individual city-states spend their time battling each other to their own determinant, to their own, no detriment, turned a blind eye to the continual fighting until it was too late. A month later, Joda staggered alone through the wreckage of a forgotten and abandoned city. Occasionally he would pause and cock an ear to the wind, listening for pursuit, then would press on again, limping through the weed-choked streets of the city. His armor and weapons were gone, as was all of his company. The city was on no map that Ged had, and Joda wondered briefly what its name had been. Ooh, hold on. I think I got a good one for that. That'll work. Okay. Ignore the whatever the thing is in the sky. That's just the closest I could find to a dilapidated city. Let's see. What its name had been. Perhaps it dated back to the time of the Brothers' War. Perhaps it was some rival of Aslor or Ged, and that was defeated in combat, or had its trade routes choked off, or was just abandoned to the cold. Joda shook his head. Most of the buildings were still standing, which was unlikely in the case of war. Much of the furnishings were still in the houses, though they had rotted to uselessness. Something had swept through here, some magical or a disease or a combination of the two, and removed every living thing. Not every living thing. There was a flurry of beating wings above him. Joda ducked instinctively, and a flock of pigeons banked overhead, disappearing behind the roof of one of the taller buildings. There were no people, or dogs, or horses, but there were birds. At least he wouldn't have to worry about starving, provided he could catch them. Provided that he avoided the goblins, of course. If not for them, Ged could have taken Aslor itself, and he could have found Vaska. Time passes. The war did not start out as a war, at least not to the participants. With the lifting of the plague, a warning in Ged, a week after Joda joined up, and with a large number of men under arms, the city-state's aristocrats had determined that the army should provide a show of force to the north. Of course, Togoth would note, privately over the fire, this also gets a large number of men foraging off the land, as opposed to suckling at the city's granaries. Togoth was 20 years older than most of the other men in the unit, and as such had been made corporal. He was also an affirmed cynic, becoming more cynical with every mile they put between themselves and Ged. Togoth also pointed out that most of their maneuvers were through lands where the farmers were unsure about whether to sell their upcoming harvest to Ged or Aslor. A large military force in said farmers' backyards might tip the balance one way or the other. Joda nodded, but said nothing, noting that Togoth's insightful comments on Ged intentions and tactics were never voiced when they were around the upper ranks. For the first week or so, there was a lot of marching, interrupted only by relatively good eating, provided by the local farmers who hoped that the army would eat and move on. The army was relatively good to Joda. His unit was made up of general outsiders, natives of the southern coast, and refugees from Giva province, and other northern regions. It was sprinkled with a few raw recruits filled with excitement and empty of knowledge, and leavened with what professional soldiers could be dragooned into serving as officers. The food was good. Fresh breads and meat-laden stews made with supplies quote-unquote donated by loyal farmers, fish from the rivers and game from the forests. Joda himself brought down a deer still in its winter coat, a rarity this late in the year, and they made jerky of the venison left over. Discipline was present, but minimal. As long as they put on a good show in the black lacquered armor and green capes at the infrequent parade marches, they drilled and marched and drilled some more, then ate. And best from Joda's viewpoint was the total lack of priests in the army. While the church was apparently concerned about the morale and morals of the men within the city-state, their concern ended as soon as they started marching around and sleeping under the cold, starless skies. It would seem that they were playing favorites, said Togath. If they went out with one army and not another, why not go out with all the armies? Asked one of the young Hotspurs. Because then, Togath said with a deep frown, they might get blood on their nice clean robes when we start fighting. And it is when, not an if. And it is a when, not an if. It's only a matter of time. Nobody builds an army without intending to use it. More time passes. Joda slowed his painful walk. Oh, that was a flashback. Never mind. Excuse me. Joda slowed his painful walk, limping from one side of the street to the other. His wounded leg was on fire now, and he tried to put as little weight on it as possible. If he could find some mare's milk, an egg, and some mineral oil, he might be able to whip up something that could aid him, he thought, or at least take his mind off the pain. Many of the roofs of the buildings were sagging from rot, and in several places had caved in entirely, but there were enough still standing to see that it had been a serviceable city, save that its inhabitants just left one morning, never to tell anyone of its existence. There was something else odd about the city that Joda could not put his finger on immediately. Then it came to him. The city had no walls. He had seen small communities like this old family manor, which did not have any walls, but something this large surviving without protective stone between it and the outside was beyond his comprehension, or not so strange. There was nothing in the city now, so the lack of walls might have been the reason they abandoned it. A weird feeling crawled up Joda's spine. He had become separated from the other survivors in the fog, and soon afterwards found the first buildings of the city. The buildings loomed in the mist like great gray shadows, resolving themselves only as Joda drew nearer. First one, then another, then a third, and then several aligning themselves in the fashion of a street. Then patches of paving stones appeared among the grass and hard-worn dirt. Side streets appeared and arched away. On both sides, Joda realized that the city was laid out like a circle, with the wide main streets leading to something at its center. Joda stayed to one side of the street now, taking comfort in the solidarity of the buildings, and limped toward the city's heart. Okay. I need to take a sip. Flashback to Togath. Indeed, Togath was right. For a while, the Ged army was drilling a similar force as in Azlor. Wait, what? Togath was right. For while the Ged army was drilling, a similar force in Azlor was also being readied. The presence of a major Ged force was a threat to Azlor, even though its walls were 10 feet thick, and it boasted mighty gates that, some said, dated back to the time of the brothers. The idea that some of the farm communities along the river might send their harvests south rather than north to Azlor was intolerable, and so the Azlorians marshaled their own force, stiffened with a healthy dose of elven mercenaries from the Shattered Islands. A sip. Yeah. A nice little sip. Alright. Oh, goodness. If you're just joining us, Jam, as a reminder, Joda fled the quarantine city as soon as the quarantine was lifted, and he joined the Ged army. And now he's in an abandoned city, injured, and the point of view keeps swapping from present time to a flashback to one of his general that he talks to a lot, because the general is very jaded and cynical. And right now we're in the middle of the second flashback. Having collected his group, resplendent in their purple and white, the rulers of Azlor sent their army on maneuvers as well. It was only a matter of time before the two forces collided. The spark that lit the flames of war was set over a few barrels of wine. Joda heard the tale later from Fenda, a former rope maker from the south who was a fertile source of the military grapevine. A unit of Ged cavalry was scouting and scavenging and came upon a winery. The workers were busy loading several casks of the recent vintage into a wagon. The lieutenant asked where they were shipping the casks. The vintner explained that there was an encampment of Azlorians nearby, and that he was sending the wine, with his compliments to their commanding officer. The cavalry lieutenant explained that the wine would better be served on the tables of the Ged forces. The vintner, faced with a dozen armed men on horseback, quickly agreed and offered to deliver an equal amount to the Ged command with his compliments. It would have been a simple matter of military procurement had not a unit of Azlorian horsemen ridden up, resplendent on their white horses. This unit was to provide an escort for the vintner's wares. Their commander explained loudly, since it was known that there were Ged robbers in the area. Busy fingies and eyes, Gorch. Harsh words were exchanged, and then blows. Swords were drawn and blood and wine spilled on the vintner's doorstep. The end result was that the Azlorian horsemen were put to full retreat while the Ged forces regrouped back at their base, spreading word of the Azlorian invasion of Ged loyal farms. Within the day, Joda, Togath, Fenda, and the rest of the unit were marching northward, seeking to block off an Azlorian retreat at the great bridge where the main route between the two cities crossed at the Alamar River. The going was slow and unpleasant. The weather had turned, and the skies unleashed a merciless pounding rain, cold and so hard that it would strike the ground and rebound, splashing those marching through it from below as well as above, i.e., sometimes the rain seemed to come straight up from underneath. The units quickly were strung out as they pressed forward, and some disappeared, never to be heard from again. Fenda said he understood that those units had been caught by Azlorian outriders, or nether-spawned creatures, summoned by foul wizards who had supposedly allied with the Azlor. Why is this music so low volume? What the hell? Weird. That's better. That's also better. Anyway. Let's see. Supposedly allied with Azlor. Joda bit back his tongue at the rumor. First, his time in Azlor showed them to have no more interest in magic than Ged, and second, the idea that magic was used primarily to summon evil and destructive creatures rubbed him raw. This was the type of ignorance that the Church encouraged and fed on, that allowed the Inquisition to proceed without impediment. Still, it was not to Joda's advantage to admit that he had been in Azlor recently, nor to confess to a sympathy to magicians, and as such, he remained silent. Togath took up the challenge of Fenda's rumors, however, and pointed out that during every war rumors had circulated about the opposite side consorting with demons, from eldritch followers of Urza or Mishra to the monstrous eaters of the dead that scavenged the battlefields, looking for wounded and crippled to feast upon. Ever pragmatic, Togath believed that the missing units had gone rogue and would eventually turn up as mercenaries in the employ of some petty noble or another within a fortnight. Joda concentrated merely on placing one foot in front of the other. Soon he'll be walking across the floor. He considered fading into the driving rain like the lost units, but decided against it. His ultimate goal was Azlor, and they were already heading that way. Besides, Fenda might be right about the Azlorian outriders. In the end, they lost the race. Enough of the fleeting Azlorian units reached the bridge in order to secure it, and they brought up fresh reinforcements from their side of the river. The Ged units ahead of Joda's force did catch their foes by surprise, but the Azlorians, after a brief battle, conducted an ordered retreat across the huge stone bridge and dug in. By the time Joda's unit arrived, a grave pit had been dug, and the fallen from that first battle had already been burned, and armed pickets had been constructed on both sides of the ridge. Joda's unit rested for the night, footsore, exhausted, and disappointed. Fenda spent the early part of the evening away from their bivouac. Hell yeah, my favorite word. And when he returned, he was spitting nails. The rumor mill said that command knew about the ford several days' travel up the Alamar. With the morning sun, they would be ordered to march there and hold it against the Azlor forces. Fenda was wrong. It was 2 hours before sunrise that the order came down, and they were rousted from their blankets and told to prepare for the march. When the sky finally lightened enough to be considered sunrise, they were already 5 miles up the river. The rain, which had slackened to a mere drizzle through the night, now greeted them anew with a cold torrent that hid everything beyond and a few feet from view. Joda kept his head down and concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other, and he is in fact walking across the floor. Back to the present. As he neared the center of the city, Joda heard the splashing of water, like a series of waterfalls. The fog was clearing now, and he could see both sides of the street. Above, the sky was a white dome. The roads converged at the city's heart in a great circle, a circus of hard, plate-sized paving stones. Grass had sprouted in the cracks between the stones, and numerous pigeons were strutting around, picking at the seeds and blades of grass. But the heart of the city was dominated by a fountain. It was twice as tall as Joda, with a wide basin and a lip that extended back 2 feet over the fountain's inner edge. Rising from the center of the fountain was a pedestal, and mounted atop the pedestal were 4 lion heads. One for each of the cardinal directions. Each of the lion heads issued a healthy spout of water that sprayed out, almost reaching the overhanging edge of the basin's rim. I know what that is. That is this bad boy right here. Damn, oh well. But, let's just... Okay. Center of the fountain. It was twice as tall as Joda, with a wide basin and a lip that extended back 2 feet over the fountain's inner edge. Rising from the center of the fountain was a pedestal, and mounted atop the pedestal were 4 lion heads, one for each of the cardinal directions, Each of the lion heads issued a healthy spout of water that sprayed out, almost reaching the overhanging edge of the basin's rim. Joda approached the fountain, and the pigeons took note of him. They exploded in a burst of wings, only to swoop down again on the far side of the circus and resume their seed-picking activities. Joda looked over the wide rim. The water looked mountain fresh, spewing from the lion's mouth. But the basin was filled with a thick growth of algae. The bottom of the basin had filled with muck. and greasy-looking plants jutted from the water, spreading wide, foul-smelling leaves. The foaming waters of the fountain collected near these stalks in rings of bubbles, and several dark shapes that Joda chose not to identify floated in the water. Joda looked around. There was motion to his right. He started and turned, and there was a figure at the edge of the circus, just where the fog began to thicken again. At first he thought it another soldier, either from Ged or Aslor. The figure was dressed in dark robes and had a hunched profile, its shoulders even with its ears. Had a hunched profile, its shoulders were even with its ears. Joda slowly turned fully toward the figure, fearful that this vision would evaporate if he moved too quickly. It had to be this dark guardian angel, the ragged man. Once was a coincidence, twice was fate. Vasca had once said. Thrice was a lead pipe cinch. What? Joda took a step toward the ragged figure, and it glided smoothly to one side into one of the buildings as if it was a ghost. Joda shouted and started limping toward the building, 100 feet away. That was when he heard the rough laughter of the goblins coming into the central plaza. Ruh-roh. We're gonna throw where is he? Where's my boy? There he is. That's my boy! Ragman! Yeah, Ragman! Yeah, Batman! Whoever did that line in that movie is doing good these days. Bless him. Whew, alright. On the fourth... back to the past. But not to play the shitty games that suck ass. On the fourth day north, their company captured a spy. An Aslorian soldier caught on the wrong side of the river was discovered, sneaking around the encampment, apparently trying to gather information. He was quickly put under a light guard in one of the supply tents. Fenda broke the news over the mess that evening. Togath noted that if the spy was in the supply tent, then he had better accommodations than they had. For effect, he wrung out his blanket and slapped it against a tree. The rain had finally slackened, but it had left behind a thin, wispy mist that covered the land and seeped into every item of clothing that the soldiers had. In the morning, they would be on the march. Fenda figured that they would reach the ford ahead of the Aslorians. The spy would be shipped back to Ged, pumped for information, and then eventually turned over to the church. By that time, the war would be over. Joda thought the spy was getting the better end of the deal in this war, but he said nothing. That evening, after the others had bedded down, he slipped out of the encampment and headed for the supply tents. The Aslorian must not have been an important spy, for they left a young boy to guard him. The youth was more slender than Joda, and had to be at least 4 years his junior. He looked like a child playing soldier in his oversized greaves and tunic, clutching onto a pike that towered over him. Yet there was something in his manner, something in the way that he drew himself up as Joda approached, that said this one, despite his age, had seen more fighting than Joda. Fenda and Togath combined. Well, more fighting than Joda, Fenda, and Togath combined. I'd like to see the prisoner, said Joda, returning the youth's salute. Do you have permission? Said the youth, his voice still childlike, not even cracking with the first hints of maturity, but was filled with iron. No, but I can get it if need be, said Joda. Half a lie was better than none, he reasoned. Still, he did not feel comfortable lying to a child. I'm not supposed to let prisoners speak with anyone unobserved, said the youth. Joda cocked an ear to the boy's thick accent and said, Northerner? The younger boy almost blushed, but nodded. Joda said, I'm from Giva province. The younger boy allowed himself a small smile. I'm from Thorn. I've heard of Giva. Then you know that men of Giva are honorable and honest. Joda paused for a moment. For the most part, at least, I need to ask the prisoner a question or two. I'm not supposed to let the prisoner speak with anyone unobserved, repeated the child. Then come and observe, said Joda. The boy hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right, this way. The makeshift holding area was a clear spot in the tent. Casks and bags had been pushed aside, and a heavy wooden spike had been driven into the center of the cleared area. A short chain, no more than 8 links, had been fastened to the spike, with the other end attached to the prisoner's manacles, so that he was forced to stand, hunched over, squat, or lie down. The prisoner was lying down, and Joda could see why they felt comfortable leaving a boy to guard him. The spy was emaciated to start with, and badly beaten during his capture. His face was a mass of bruises, and one eye was totally shut from swelling. Blood crusted on both sides of the prisoner's mouth, and his once white tunic was dirty and bloody. To Joda, it looked as if the prisoner had not arrived in camp to steal information, but more likely to steal bread. The prisoner looked up with the one good eye and croaked, "What now?" "Just a question or two," said Joda. "You are from Aslor?" The prisoner gave a chortle and threatened to become a body-racking cough. Oh, and threatened... What? The prisoner gave a chortle that threatened to become a body-racking cough. At length he said, "Sure, why not?" "You are from Aslor," repeated Joda. "Yeah," said the prisoner through swollen lips. "What about it?" "I need to know about a man named Vaska," said Joda. "Wada?" said the prisoner in a throaty whisper. "No, Vaska," said Joda. "No, I need some water," said the prisoner. "In the barrel over there." Joda looked at the young guard and raised his eyebrows in a question. The boy nodded and went to the barrel, pulling out a broad, bowled ladle. He took it to the prisoner and tipped it slightly. The prisoner cradled the bowl of the ladle. That doesn't make sense to me. In his manacled hands and drank deeply. "Vaska," prompted Joda again. The prisoner coughed, and it was a wet, throaty cough this time. "Never heard of him," he said. He smacked his lips, moistening them with his tongue. "Hold on. This Vaska was a sorcerer?" "A spellcaster, yes," said Joda. The young guard had replaced the ladle in the water bucket and was now looking intently at Joda. "Church has him," said the prisoner. "Yeah, that's where I heard the name. Supposedly he was caught performing sorcery, raising spirits, sacrificing farm animals, that sort of thing. But instead of just killing him, they've got him locked up in Aslor. Inquisition business." "Is he still there?" asked Joda, aware of the anticipation in his voice. "Dunno," said the prisoner, looking up with one good eye. "You'd have to ask the churchman about that." Joda thought about it a moment, then turned away. "Hey," said the prisoner, "I told you what you wanted. You gotta tell me one." "What do you need to know?" asked Joda. "I heard a rumor," said the prisoner. "You Gedheads," I love that. "You Gedheads have black wizards working for you. You've raised a nasty spirit of your own, an eater of the dead. Is that true?" "No," lied Joda calmly. "We have 3 of them, all lusting for Aslorian blood." Before the prisoner could react to the statement, Joda turned and walked out of the tent. A young voice called from behind him. The boy guard, one word, came up, his brow a single dark line over his eyes. "Who is this Vaska?" "Oh. Who is this Vaska?" Joda didn't want to lie to the boy, but didn't want the youngster to have unanswered questions that he might seek answers to elsewhere. "He's a wizard," Joda said simply. "I heard. What is he to you?" said the boy, and the iron was back in his voice. Joda took a deep breath and plunged fully into the untruth. "I lost my family thanks to this Vaska. I have my own reason to reach Aslor, you see. I have a personal reason to find this wizard." The boy looked at the ground and spat. "It's such a damn waste," he said. "Wizards?" said Joda. "Fighting," said the lad. "I mean fighting between the cities. They're all human, all real people with real lives. Meanwhile, the goblin raids are getting worse and worse." Joda nodded. "You'd think with all the people coming south, the church and the city-states would realize where the true threat lies." The boy snorted. I hope I live to see that day." I hope we both live to that day, said Joda. The boy smiled and held out a hand. Tivadar, he said. Joda took the small, strong hand and gave his assumed name and his unit, and asked the lad to keep the matter of his inquiry quiet. Then Joda left Tivadar, the child guard behind, and headed back to his unit's encampment. I'm checking something. Okay, there is no... Okay, yeah, he didn't find a... whatchamacallit? He didn't find a face claim for Tivadar. Oh well. Anyway, back to the present. The goblins entered the center square. Singing lustily, one of their numbers shouted for the others to pipe down, or he would do some piping himself on their flat heads. See, it would be even funnier if he just said he would do some piping and then just didn't elaborate. Or I'm gonna pipe you down. You hear that? Said the one shouting for quiet. His voice carried even over the thundering roar of the fountain. You hear what? Said one of the others. You heard somebody shout? Said the first one. Yeah, you, came another rough voice. There's nobody here. Softskins left this place years ago. But they left their stuff, came another voice, this one snuffling and nasal. I never knew they'd ever leave their stuff. That's bad. That's bad. He's just Homer Simpson. There you go. Also, it's not multiple tracks, it's one long soundtrack. That's bad. That's good. Said the first. That's bad. Said the first voice. That means they're coming back soon. All the goblins are Homer Simpson now. We'll be ready for him, shouted another, which kicked off another round of shouts, songs, rude threats. Beneath the overhanging lip of the fountain, Joda clung to the inside wall of the basin. The turgid water was higher than his chin, and he had to tip his head back in order to breathe. Muck seemed to crawl over him. Wait, what? Beneath the overhanging lip of the fountain, Joda clung to the inside wall of the basin. Oh, okay. The turgid water was higher than his chin, and he had to tip his head back in order to breathe. Muck seemed to crawl over his legs and ankles, and the ice-cold water tingled against his flesh. He was already losing the sensation in his toes, and considering what might be in the water, that was for the best. The one whose voice Joda heard first, the apparent leader, was speaking again. Yeah, he bellowed. We'll be ready for him, just like the last time. I can't keep my Homer. And there were more chests, and there were more cheers. Beneath the rim, Joda hoped that they would move on, camp in some other part of the city, or just move away from here. The cold, clammy feeling was creeping up his legs as the water stole the warmth from him. His wounded leg, which had earlier seemed to be on fire, now felt as if it had daggers made of ice jammed into the wound. The cold reached his loins, and stomach. He wondered if he was turning blue, and dabba-dee-abba-die. He tried to shift slightly from his crouch, but was rewarded with a painful set of needles along both legs. He shifted again, then halted entirely, stopping himself from even breathing. There was a shadow in the water in front of him. Something was directly above him. Sitting on the rim itself, the shadow wavered in the churning waters of the fountain, but he was sure that it had mule-shaped ears on either side of its pointed head and a heavy unslung jaw. "What are you doing?" came a voice from nearby. "Thirsty," said the shadow. Said the shadow about Joda? I guess next to. "I want a drink." And with that, the goblin muzzle leaned down directly over Joda's hiding face to sip from the fountain. Joda took a deep breath and slid beneath the greenish water, hoping he could hold his breath until the goblin was done. Back to the past. Where are we? The unit armed forces of Ged reached the ford first and dispersed a token garrison left by the Aslorians, a garrison that had been unaware of the state of war between the two city-states until the first cavalry units thundered across the shallow crossing, screaming and putting those who fled before them to the sword. The bulk of the army crossed without incident and encamped on the far side, in Aslorian territory. Scouts reported that the main body of Aslor's forces was 2 days away. Their sources were to dig in on the soft earth surrounding the ford or try to seek out the Aslorians in the surrounding hills. Joda's feet felt as if they were as thick as leather boots, and his legs felt like lead. So naturally, the decision was to meet the Aslorians in the hills, and they marched again into the fog-shrouded hills. On the morning of the second day, an outrider brought news of the fog. The Aslorians were just south, in the next valley over. They were still in marching formation. They had no outsiders of their own, and as such were unaware that the Ged forces had beaten them to their ford. They were vulnerable to an ambush. The Ged forces, aided by a thick blanket of morning fog, would top the low line of hills that framed the Aslorian line of march. The commanders deployed their heavy cavalry to the left flank to ride down on the enemy's rear echelon, while the rest of the Ged army engaged the Aslorians along the length of the line of march. At least that was Fenda's idea of what was happening, and for once Togath had no response. Joda knew little of the full plans of the Ged commanders. All he knew was a blanket of white on all sides through which moved the shadowy forms of other Ged foot soldiers. They were moving shoulder to shoulder up the hill. Togath was on one side, Fenda on the other. Beyond them were other members of their unit, becoming misty and indistinct in the fog, grayer and grayer until they vanished entirely in a field of white. They ambled in a rough line at the top of the hillock, some of the ragged forms reaching the crest before others. Just as Joda reached the top, there was a shout from his right and the distant blast of a trumpet. Then everyone on his right and left was shouting and running down the opposite side of the hill, charging full tilt into the thicker fog beyond that hid the Aslorians. Charging full tilt into the thicker fog beyond that hill. God damn it. Charging full tilt into the thicker fog beyond that hid the Aslorians? That doesn't make sense. I'm gonna take Thiep. For most of the descent, there was nothing, only other Ged soldiers running alongside Joda through the fog. Then shapes loomed up ahead of them. The shapes clarified into desperate Aslorian foot soldiers, trying to pull themselves into formations capable of receiving the Ged charge. Pikemen still tried to form protective squares, as the first attackers were already among them. Let's see if I can actually find an image that even gives the vibe of this. Huh. That's about as close as I can get. The vibes of fighting a war or whatever the fuck. Let's see. For the most shapes clarified into these ordered foot soldiers. Pikemen still tried to form protective squares as the first attackers were already among them. Then there was just pandemonium on all sides. As the armies met, Joda had his sword out in front of him, and he ran with the rest. He paused only briefly whenever a shape rose in front of him. If it were the black and green of Ged, it was a friend. He hoped that the other fog shape would recognize they were on the same side. If it wore any other colors, Joda waved his sword in front of him, hoping to force any opponent back, or at least convince his foe to go attack someone else. Shadows and silhouettes danced all around. Ahead of him, the mist cleared enough to show a figure wearing enemy colors, purple and white. The enemy raised its blade over its head and charged forward. Joda swung his blade around in a long, lazy arc. Hilarious. Joda's blade struck something hard, and when he pulled it back, it was coated with blood. The figure had charged past him and was swallowed again by the fog. The idea that it was someone else's blood on the blade trickled dully into the brain as another shape, also not wearing black and green, lunged into view, brandishing a spear. Joda ducked under the thrust point of the spear. Oh, we got an ad break in 23 seconds. Joda ducked under the thrust point of the spear and came up hard with his sword. His arm tensed under the jolt as his blade bit deep into the attacker, and then the spear wielder was gone as well. About this time, Joda stopped thinking, at least in terms of who was doing what to whom. He was concentrating on only hitting that which was not black and green, and avoiding being hit himself. A rain of javelins came from somewhere and fell among his company, bringing down several of his fellow troops. One stuck dully into the soft ground next to his left foot. Joda stared at it a moment, and then was caught up as another opponent lunged at him. It took a few moments for Joda to realize he was no longer fighting other humans. Rather, these were more slender, whitish creatures with elongated faces and scaled armor, shaped like oak leaves. Elves. They were fighting elves, and he remembered Fenda's story about the hiring of mercenaries from the Shattered Isles. Elven mercenaries who delighted in battling against humans who broke their civilization centuries before. Joda saw Fenda briefly on the ground, the rope maker's head lying there, a wide smile across his face, his body nowhere to be seen. Something soft and snake-like uncoiled in the pit of Joda's belly, and for the first time he smelled the scent of human blood on the wet, fog-bound grass. There was another opponent, and another, and Joda fought like an automaton, warding off the worst of the blows. Something, a dagger, or a short, thin blade rattled across the lamellar armor, but there was no sign of his assailant. There were shouts of victory and death all around him, but he had no idea which side they belonged to. And we're gonna pause for the ad break. Good evening, VOD watchers. I hope you're doing well. Doing pretty well myself. I feel like I'm getting close to the end of Dawn Trail. I recently finished a playthrough of Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure and started a semi-first playthrough of Hot Wheels Turbo Racing for the PlayStation 1. For a while I had a copy of the N64 version, but it never really played very well, I should say. And I got rid of it. And then recently I was reminded of it because one of the people I watch on YouTube, I forget which one, my guess is Austin Eruption, but he was like, yeah, there's a lot of underrated racing games on the PlayStation. One of which was Hot Wheels Turbo Racing, and I agree with him. It's been really fun. Tough, but fun. And then after that is Jet Moto was another one that he mentioned, that I've bought in both of them since then, since they were relatively cheap to buy. And I've been enjoying them quite a bit. Other than that, not much new. I'm making a mono green elf deck I dismantled my original mono green commander deck and am turning it into an elf deck, and it's been phenomenal to test with in digitally. I haven't gotten all the cards yet. I'm still waiting on like 3 of them to get here in the mail. I might proxy them until they get here. We'll see. But yeah, it's been testing real well. And we're back from the ad. Come on. There we go, and then... Okay, that volume's fine where it is. Okay. Okay. There were shouts to his left, and Joda assumed that was the Ged heavy cavalry finally smashing its way up the length of the enemy line. A horseman in Ged armor almost rode him down, and Joda fell backwards over a pile of bodies, human and elven. When he arose, his armor was coated in slime and mud. More shouts, and these sounded like shouts of victory. There were more people in the fog wearing armor like his, so he assumed they had won. The slender elves and the humans with bloodied white and muddied purple were in full flight now, seeding them the battlefield. Ceding. Never heard of that one. Setting? I don't know. That was when the goblins attacked. Ruh-roh. Again, Joda was not aware of what had happened at first, only that the shouts of triumph had died and were replaced by panicked screams. There were drums in the distance, great kettle drums not used by human armies. The elves and men of Aslor were no longer fleeing them, but were now running toward them and past them. Out of the misty fog behind the fleeing forces appeared a new set of shadows, bunched together so thick that they seemed to be a single creature, spreading from the right edge of Joda's vision to the left. Goblins appeared out of the mists, dressed in ragged armor, looted from raids on other human encampments or abandoned battlefields. Now that's something I've got an image for. Open. Thank you. Most were the green-skinned beasts that Vaska had fought, but among them were ones whose flesh was bone white. These creatures fought like madmen with swords clenched tightly in each hand, not caring for their own injuries. Some of the goblins were sinewy and thin, like parodies of the elves that they brought down with stone-headed clubs. Behind the goblin line, larger giant-sized shapes that Joda could not completely identify loomed through the fog. The goblins crashed into the human forces and threw them back like an ocean wave striking a sand castle. Joda felt as if he was carried physically backwards as opposed to fleeing of his own volition. He slashed at a few of the goblins, and they disappeared to be replaced by others. A riderless horse bearing the livery of a Ged commander thundered through the goblin lines, its flesh striped with numerous cuts. Its eyes wide with fear. The two warring human armies rallied and unified against the goblins, forming knots of humanity as the goblin tide surged forward. Joda found himself on a low hillock flanked by an elf on one side and as Lorien on the other. Half of the elf's face was slick with blood, and part of his ear was missing. The boy guard, Tivador, would be so pleased, thought Joda bitterly. Everyone was united to fight the goblins. Then there was a fiery explosion not too far to their left, a reddish hue that spread out through the fog, bearing light and screams. Joda thought at once of magic and wondered if the goblins had their own spellcasters. There was little time for such thought, for a wave of goblins was upon them again. They were driven from the hillock, and the elf disappeared beneath the swords of the goblins. Something bit into his thigh, and Joda lashed out automatically, cleaving something that screamed in an inhuman tongue, and then was silent. They pulled back slightly up the side of the valley, then they retreated. Then they were routed, casting aside their weapons and their armor in the dim hope of outdistancing the goblins. Joda remembered that the hillside seemed smaller on the way down. Now it seemed like a cliff, covered with wet, greasy grass that denied any proper flight and threatened to spill Joda and the others back into the laps of the goblins behind them. There were others with Joda, blind-eyed in panic and uncaring as to what lay ahead of them, as long as it was not what lay behind them. The ground in front of them leveled out, then descended again. He half ran, half tumbled down the slope, the screams and shouts of the goblins and men and elves dying behind him. Still he ran with the others up another hill and down again, until at last exhaustion and the blood leaking from his leg stopped him, and he collapsed in the wet grass. The world spun around him and then closed around him as he felt unconscious. I think they mean fell. As he fell unconscious. Joda did not know how long he slept, only that he had been unconscious a long time. His leg felt as if it was on fire, and the world around him was still fog-bound, still wrapped in cotton. There was no noise, and Joda had no idea where he was. He guessed from the general brightness of the sky which way was south, and began limping north and slightly west, hoping to reach the ford and find other members of his unit, or even other humans or elves. He met no other survivors in his flight, not even bodies left from the assault. The going was slow and eternal, and he felt as if he had been abandoned in a small universe of his own, a universe bounded only by his fog-limited vision, bounded by that and by the growing pain in his leg. He came upon the city later that day. Return to the present. The lead goblin smacked his companion, almost knocking him into the fountain's pool. "What are you, stupid?" he snarled. The other goblin snapped back. "What do you mean, stupid? You ain't gonna drink that," said the lead goblin. "Why not? It's just water," said the goblin. "It's dirty water," said the lead goblin. So look at the mud and plants and stuff. It's polluted. So look at the pigeons," said the lead goblin, sounding exasperated. "What about the pigeons?" said the other one. "So the pigeons do what the pigeons do in that water," said the leader. "You want to drink that?" There was a long moment of silence, then the goblin said, "I guess not." "You are so stupid sometimes," said the lead goblin. There were some shouts from across the plaza. The lead goblin bellowed, "What do you see?" Another throaty bellow came back. "Something's moving down there." "What is it?" "Dunno," came the answer. "Come look." "Let's move it," said the lead goblin. "But I'm still thirsty," said the other goblin. "We find a stream later," said the leader. "Let's go." I wish you could see how this is spelled. It's so funny. The two padded away, taking the other goblins with them. The fountain remained unguarded for a moment, the only sound being the thunder of the water from the lion's mouth. Then Joda broke the surface, spitting and gagging. He had remained underwater until his lungs had nearly burst, and still inhaled a fair amount of the particulate-laden waters. Now he sputtered and coughed, aware that any goblin within 10 yards of him would be able to kill him like a kitten. Joda inhaled again, deeply, and coughed again, but there were no goblins around to hear. He wiped the muck and algae from his face and looked around. He was alone again in the central plaza. Slowly he pulled himself out of the ice-cold water. He would have to find shelter and then escape the city. No, escape the city center first, then make a fire, dry himself off. His magic was good for that, at least. He felt chilled to the bone as he staggered out of the square, heading the direction that the goblins had originally come from. Only later, once he had built a fire in one of the outlying buildings and dried off, did he realize that his leg no longer hurt, and the wound had closed up entirely. End of chapter. Hey. Let me take a sip. Oh, that was more like 3 gulps, but still. Chapter 5, Sima. Sima, S-I-M-A, not sure. Another quote from Arkol, Argivian scholar. Most of the histories of the Dark portray the Church of Tal as a monolithic, single-minded faith ruling over and often contending against a double handful of rebellious city-states. While it is true that the Church was more unified and organized than city-states, much to its advantage, it was not a single monolithic structure. Records of the period indicate that it was a confusing tapestry of smaller saint faiths, usurped local religions, and holy cults of personality. Add to this the wide variety of divided dogmas and outright heresies within the Church of Tal's ranks, and it becomes obvious why the Inquisitions and the later Crusades were formed. Of course, it would be equally obvious that those Inquisitions and Crusades were infested with the same disputes over dogma, cults of personality, and outright heresies as the rest of the church hierarchy. I like these little scholar historical from the future look into the past thing. That's sick. I like that. It's a cool idea. Come on, mouse. Do your thing. There you go. Okay. Anyway, chapter 5, Sima. We'll probably only get about halfway through this because I'm still gonna end stream at about an hour 30 in. Joda found his way back to the Alamar River and began following it south toward the Great Bridge. Okay. Alright, let's see here. What can I use? Flats, Lake of the Dead, River Delta. That should do fine. Alright. Oh, that's better. Joda found his way back to the Alamar River and began following it south toward the Great Bridge. He considered heading north, far from the madness of the warring city-states, particularly since his wounded leg was feeling better, but the need to find Vasco was too great. He moved quietly, keeping the languid flow of the river to his right. As he moved south during the morning and afternoon, finding shade in the heat of the day, he used his spell of light sparingly to light fires in the evening, and once to stun a river rat long enough for him to catch it for supper. He found he developed greater strength and control over the light as he repeated the process of casting the spell. Yet his achievements would mean little if he could not reach Aslor. He was hampered by the fact that he did not know who, if anyone, was winning the war. He met no one along the river's side, but found a large amount of abandoned equipment, enough to deck himself in Aslorian garb and still carry the fragments of his Ged armor in his backpack. He had also found among the cast-offs a bottle made of carved crystal, filled with rum. Hell yeah. Regardless of who controlled the bridge, he would be prepared to give them a drink. In the end, it did not matter. When he arrived at the bridge on the gray, overcast morning, Aslor forces controlled the northern end of the Great Bridge, and Ged forces the southern. Neither seemed particularly pleased about the presence of the other, but there seemed to be a lack of unsheathed weapons, and traffic moved effortlessly from one side of the bridge to the other. Indeed, a large caravan was encamped on the far side of the bridge in Ged territory. Joda stopped an ostler, who was... What the hell is ostler? Ostler. Ostler. Who was bringing up fresh horses, and asked what had happened in his absence. "War's over." "Oh," said the stableman. "Church negotiated a peace treaty between the two after the Battle of Pitdown." "Hell yeah." "Stragglers like you have been coming in for about a week now. You were there?" "I'm afraid I was," said Joda. The ostler sucked on his teeth and said, "I heard it was bad." "Bad enough," said Joda. "So one can travel to Aslor, then?" "One can," said the ostler. "But unless one feels like camping outside the city walls, one shouldn't." Joda raised a tired eyebrow at the other man. "The plague flag flies over Aslor," said the ostler, "like it did earlier over Ged. The cold grip, or something like that. This time. Nasty bit of work, I hear. Your stomach freezes into a solid lump, as I understand it, and you die trying to pass it out of your body." The older man shook his head sagely at the encampment on the far side of the river. "That's why this lot is heading south to Ged. Can't say I blame them." Joda raised his head and poked a chin in the general direction of the encampment. "And who are this lot?" And who are this lot?" The stableman leaned forward in a conspiratorial fashion. "Churchmen," he said simply. "The church?" Joda blinked. "Since when does the church leave a city, even one with the cold grip?" "Part of the treaty, I hear," said the stableman. "They have a cartload of heretics, wizards, and sinners that they're going to burn in Ged." "I see," said Joda, thinking at once of Vaska. "Would he be among the prisoners?" "They're going to tie them to stakes and set them on fire the first morning they get there." "Burn them alive," said the ostler with a grin. "Sort of a welcome to the neighborhood party." He broke down in a wheeling laugh. "Charming," said Joda. "And they're heading for Ged." "Indeed they are, good sir," said the stableman. "Indeed they are." Joda let the stableman go about his business and paused only to change out of the tattered remains of his Aslorian uniform and into the tattered remains of his Ged armor. Hilarious. This boy playing both sides. The Aslor guards sneered at him but let him pass. The Ged guards, on the other hand, challenged him as he approached. He gave his assumed name and his former unit. The commander of the bridge guards checked a large board. "They're a survivor of Pitdown?" he asked in a nasal braying. "That's what they call it, I suppose," said Joda, trying to remain professional. His eyes swept the church encampment. Could he find a way to join the caravan south? Should he? "That was over a week ago," said the commander, an accusing whine in his voice. "I was separated from my unit," said Joda, and shrugged. "I didn't have a map with me." The commander made a dismissive snort and hooked a thumb toward the encampment. "Join up with the church guard. They'll be escorting Her Grace Primata Delphine, the bitch, and the holy prisoners to Ged. Then you'll be reassigned once you get there or discharged. War's over. You might have heard." Joda stared at the bridge guard commander in disbelief. "Is there a problem, soldier?" said the commander, his whine growing indignant. Joda snapped back to reality. "No, sir. Thank you, sir." Gathering his backpack, Joda made his way to the church encampment. There's a typo. It said "may his way" instead of "made his way. Hilarious. Itchy. Oh, that's better. The encampment was nearly packed and ready when he arrived, and was a hive of activity, of scum and villainy. Anyway, let's see if I can find something that resembles an encampment. It's about as close as I can get. The encampment was nearly packed and ready when he arrived, and was a hive of activity. Joda looked for someone in charge without luck. He also looked for where the holy prisoners were, but with similar lack of success. Somebody behind him shouted something, but Joda continued to scan the crowd. There were a number of Ged soldiers, and some of them had a wide-eyed, slightly terrified visage. Other survivors of Pitdown, he guessed. He wondered if he too had that painfully honest expression on his face. He felt the mirror on the inside of his boot, but still did not reach for it. Someone shouted again, but Joda's blood ran cold when he saw Delphine Primata of the Order of St. Zil being helped onto her horse. Her mount was a huge white gelding set with an ornate box-like seat that allowed the large woman to sit saddle-side. Despite himself, Joda felt like running away. Surely his beard and ragged attire would disguise him after all this time. The Prima looked up, and for a moment Joda thought their eyes locked. His blood froze and his heart dropped into his boots, but the Primata's face remained impassive, or at least no more irritated than she normally seemed, and she gave no hint that she recognized Joda. Then a heavy hand was laid on Joda's shoulder, and he jumped 3 feet in place, twisting to face his assailant as he did so. Togath backed up 3 steps, taking his hand off Joda's shoulder as he did so. "Did the battle leave you deaf, man? I called you, and you seemed lost in your own little world. Tal's book, it is good to see you survive the battle." Joda took a deep breath and tried to calm his thundering heart. Togath had called him by his assumed name, the one he had enlisted under, and he had ignored it. "I'm afraid I've wandered a long time to get here," he said. "You and I both," said Togath, then lowered his voice. "Though there should be a few more boring jobs than guarding Our Lady the overstuffed suit bag. At least we deserve the rest, huh? At least we deserve the rest, eh?" Joda smiled and was rewarded with another slap on the back. At last, the company formed up. Joda and Togath's group was assigned to the rear guard, which meant that the rest of the procession had to pass before them. First came the vanguard, then fresh troops sent from Ged. Their lamellar armor waxed as a lustrous black, and their freshly laundered tunics was as green as a sun-dappled forest. Then came the outriders, similarly outfitted and colorful. Then the Primata's horse, followed by a number of lesser church officials, either mounted on horseback or in personal carriages. Then a lumbering wagon, which Togath mentioned contained either the church treasury from Aslor or several thousand copies of the Book of Tal, or both. Then another unit of footmen, this group more ragged and practical looking than the vanguard. Then came several wagons holding the holy prisoners, then Joda's units in the rear. The wagons holding the prisoners were only a little larger than the donkey carts that hauled Mother Dobbs away. They were stuffed with prisoners who were manacled and hobbled, and the manacles of a few were tied to the railing of the wagon. They were an uninspiring group. If the church was to be judged in the strength of those who opposed it, there was little that could be said on its behalf. Indeed, it looked as if the church had emptied Aslor's gowls. It's like the word goal, except you swap O and A. It's weird. Aslor's gowls and dungeons. In order to provide a sufficient stock of sacrifices, Togath could note, but did not, that the prisoners were examples of the enemies of the church in the way poverty, dirtiness, and sickness and famine were considered enemies, for they were all clear examples of those traits. Joda scanned the prisoners, looking for Vaska's face, then goggled in surprise. At the prow of the third wagon, her wrists manacled with ornate chains, was the blue-clad woman from the alley. Her garb was tattered prisoner gray now, but her heart-shaped face and bangs were unmistakable. Joda stared at her. She turned slightly and her eyes met Joda's. As with the primata earlier, he got the feeling that she saw him looking at her. But this time, there was the feeling... Oh my god, what? Oh my god, the way this is formatted is so strange. Or the way that these words are ordered is very weird. As with Primata earlier, he got the feeling that she saw him looking at her. But this time, there was the feeling that she recognized him. Her head bobbed just a bit, and she allowed herself a small smile, and she turned back to face the direction of the procession. The last of the prisoner wagons rumbled by. There was no sign of Vasca among the prisoners. Togath elbowed Joda and said it was their turn, and they collected in the back of the van with the other shabbily dressed survivors of Pitdown, bringing up the rear. Some time passes. It had taken little effort to volunteer both himself and Togath for guard duty, except perhaps Togath's unwillingness to get only a half-night's sleep after marching all day. It took a bit more persuasion and the salvaged bottle of rum to arrange to be assigned to guard one particular prisoner. Most of the sinners, criminals, and ne'er-do-wells scheduled for the Inquisition pyre were put into one large tent for the evening. Those who might provide particular problems were given their own quarters and their own guards. So it was that Togath and Joda ended up in the early hours relieving the guards of the Blue Woman's tent. Joda noted that the church was much more serious about its prisoners than the Gad military was. 2 guards were posted to each tent and told in no uncertain terms to keep all outsiders out until relieved. Joda waited until most of the guards were changed throughout the camp and the area began to settle down. Then he said, "I'm going to go into the tent, Togath. I want you to stay here." There was a silence a moment, and then Togath said, "So that's what this is all about." Joda looked at the larger man quizzically. Togath shook his head. "All this effort for a bit of fluff? What? Can't you just wait until you get back to Ged? I know a very good house in the Docks district." Oh, Togath. You rascal. You're a rascal, Togath. I wish there was a fucking image of Togath. He's a fucking rascally boy. Man, whatever. Silly man. I know that the armor doesn't match, but this is the closest I've got to a generic soldier man. There we go. He looks vaguely like Patrick Warburton, but we'll work with it. Come on! Bigums. Bigum size, please. Thank you. There we go. Alright. Yeah, but now Togath is definitely Patrick Warburton. Let's see. All this effort for a bit of fluff? Can't you just wait until you get back to Ged? I know of a very good house in the Docks district. Joda understood what the guard was saying and shook his head violently. He could feel the blood rushing to his face in embarrassment. "That's not what I meant. I need to talk to this prisoner." Togath blew out his cheeks in a derisive snore. "Yeah, that's what I always said too. Just wanted to talk. Never ends up that way though." Joda felt his face grow hot. "I'm serious. I'm looking for somebody." "So are we all, lad, and so are we all," said Togath, then gave Joda a long, steely look. "Go on then. I don't think the church will care, and she's kindling in another way. And she'll be kindling in another way. I'm going to move off a little here and keep a lookout for the watch commander. Just keep it down if you don't mind." Joda wanted to argue with the other guard, but instead just shook his head and unbuttoned the tent flap. As he slipped in, Togath gave one last shot. And don't take too long. I think I might need a good long talk as well in a couple hours. He punctuated the remark with a nasty laugh. There were supplies in the tent, shoved against one wall, with a cleared space in the middle. In the center was a great iron peg driven into the rocky soil, and a short chain linked the peg to the prisoner's manacles. It was similar to the method that the Ged military had used to keep their captured spy, but the iron peg, the chain, and the manacles themselves were inscribed with spider-like tracery of thin silver lines, similar, Joda noted, to the manacles that had bound Vaska. "It's about time you got here," said the blue woman, now dressed in gray. Joda scowled, a hand out, palm down, motioned for... What? Joda scowled a hand out, palm down, motioned for her to lower her voice. He didn't trust Togath to not stand by the tent flap and listen to what was going on. "I need some information," Joda said in a level tone. The woman raised her crossed and bound arms. Nope, her crossed and bound hands. "What, no rescue? And here I thought you'd come to free me." She shook her head and her hair swept across her face like waves. "Sorry I didn't contact you sooner, Joda, of Giva province. I've been a little busy." There was not a hint of apology in her voice. "I want to know about Vaska," said Joda, kneeling down opposite her, figuring how long the chain truly was and staying outside her range. The woman held up her wrists again. "Free me first." Joda shook his head. "Information first. You left me puking in an alley last time we talked." Okay, she doesn't have blue hair, but this is the best I could do with what I could find. What the fuck? Open, goddammit. Yeah, this is the best I could find. I know she doesn't have white hair. Just pretend she has blue hair. Or, pretend she has blue hair and not white hair. Alright, the woman's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it felt as if she was trying to carve her way into Joda's soul. He sat there unmoving, waiting for her to make her decision. At length she licked her lips, shut her eyes, and said, "Vaska is dead. I'm sorry." Her shoulders slumped slightly forward as she said it. That did sound like an apology. The bottom dropped out of Joda's stomach at her words, and she felt dizzy for a moment. A repeat of the feeling he had in that alleyway. It was not magic that brought on the vertigo, but fear. Fear that the woman was speaking the truth. "No," he said at last in a whisper. He should have gone back to Aslor immediately after he escaped that city. He never should have left Vaska behind. He never should have split up from Vaska in the first place. He never should have cast the spell that brought the church into goblins. "I am sorry," said the woman, raising her crossed wrists again. "We don't have time for this. You have to get me loose." Joda shook his head again. His mouth worked, but there was no sound for the moment. Finally, he managed. How did he... The woman settled back on her haunches, and her face was a combination of concern and impatience. "That doesn't matter. No, I'm sorry, it does. Short version is all I know. They apparently caught him soon after you got away. He put up a fight. They shot him with crossbows. That's what I put together after they caught me." "No," said Joda firmly. "We captured a spy from Aslor. He said that Vaska was alive, that the church had him. The church put out that information," said the woman quickly. "They were hoping you would hear and come back to rescue him." She paused a moment, then added, "They caught me when I came looking instead." There was a long silence in the tent. Joda's face felt flushed, but not from embarrassment. Vaska was dead, and it was his fault. The woman waited for a moment, then in a low, stern voice said, "You understand what happened? They put out a false rumor in hopes of getting you to come back. They wanted you. I think they still do. From the questions they asked, she held out her wrists a third time. Can we go now? Joda blinked back the wetness at the corners of his eyes. Could he trust this woman? Was Vasca really dead, or was she just telling her own story to get him to free her? He looked into her cold blue eyes and saw that she was serious, and there was a dozen other stories she could have told instead. Vasca was dead, and the church was still looking for him. He looked at the manacles. I don't have the key, he said. I don't know. I can't, he stammered. The woman sighed impatiently. Of course you can. I can't because they're welded onto me. If I try, the feedback will overwhelm me. You can. Just open them with a spell. Joda looked at the manacles carefully now. They had a thin joining line along one side, but no sign of a lock or catch. I don't know how, said Joda in a small voice. I don't know that spell. So make it up, hissed the woman. What's your color? Joda looked at the manacled woman with disbelief. My what? Your color! The woman strove to keep her words to a whisper, but it seemed a losing battle. I don't believe that Vasca ever... Okay, we'll take it from the beginning. Oh yeah, I don't believe that Vasca never... Okay, we'll take it from the beginning. What spells do you know? I can make a bright light appear, he said. Bright, hot light. And I take it that's what got you away from the primata in the first place, said the woman. Apparently that put a real wrinkle in her wimple. What else? I can make potions with the right material, he continued, then spread his hands out wide. You know that as well. I haven't been doing this very long. I can see that, said the woman, with a bit of ice in her voice. Joda looked in her eyes and thought he saw gears turning as she strove to figure out what to do next. At length she said, when you cast a spell, what do you think of? Think of? Said Joda, then realized what she was saying. I think of my home, where I grew up, in Giva. Mountain, plains, seacoast, prompted the woman. There were mountains in the distance, said Joda, but it was mostly farmland, orchards, vineyards, gardens. Plains, then, said the woman. That fits with the curative magic and the light balls. All right, here's what we can do. I want you to pull out the magic of your land. You know how to do that, right? Joda nodded and closed his eyes. He was back in Giva, back at the family mansion. Slowly, he pulled the energies from his memories and shaped them into a glowing white ball in his mind. Good, said the woman. What are you envisioning? I'm thinking of a white ball of light, said Joda. That ball is the mana, the magical energy, said the woman. Now I want you to keep thinking of that ball and open your eyes. Joda did so. Now I'm going to tell you how to shape that mana. I can't be 100% accurate because it can't really be put into words. Like writing down a dance, said Joda, feeling a fresh twinge of regret for Vasca. The woman almost smiled. Almost. Close enough. Now I want you to shape the ball into a disc, flatten the poles, and imagine the edge of the disc so narrow that it can easily fit into the seam of these manacles. Can you do that? I can try, said Joda, flattening the ball in his mind. Then he asked, Have you ever done this before? Made a spell on the fly? Asked the woman. Yes, one time. I had to do it for another mage who had his hands trapped like mine. Did it work? Said Joda. The disc of mana was a spinning vortex, and he imagined it moving toward the manacles. Sort of, said the woman. He casts spells one-handed now. Easy. Just let the disc slide into the joint and move along the length of the manacles. Yes, that's it. Meanwhile, Togath had wandered a few feet away initially, but curiosity had quickly gotten the better of him. By the time he was back into hearing distance, the voices were soft and indistinct. Maybe the lad had been telling the truth, thought the older guard. Maybe he just wanted to talk to the woman. Waste of an opportunity, he thought. But every man has his own desires. The soft murmuring went on for a few moments, and there was this flickering of light within. Indistinct shadows formed on the walls. The The murmuring voices stopped. The lad was getting careless now, thought Togath. One thing to leave one's post for a bit of personal excitement, quite another to light a lantern and call attention to the matter. He better stop Joda before he roused the whole camp with his foolishness. Besides, thought Togath with a grin, it was his turn. The large guard pulled back the tent flap and said, "Lad, I hate to interrupt, but you've had your fun." His words died in his throat as he saw the pair kneeling on the dirt floor of the tent. The woman's manacles were laying to one side, and she was rubbing her wrists. Both the lad and the woman looked up at once. They had the look rabbits. Oh, they had the look rabbits get when you surprised them. Then the woman raised one hand and balled it into a fist. Togath felt something warm and wet spread over the front of his brain. Then the woman pulled her fist toward her, and the wet something seemed to be pulled through the front of his skull. It was as if she had dug a fish hook into his brain and just pulled. It happened very quickly. Togath managed to say, "What the?" before slamming into the soft earth. And that's where we'll cut it for this week. That was fucking sick, dude. Okay. Ooh, I set up too fast. That was awesome. Things are starting to come together. Also, Patrick Warburton just died in the book. Excuse me. All right, VOD watchers, if you're still listening, feel free to listen to these suggestions made by me and YouTube. Top left is the one for YouTube. Bottom left is the link to the playlist for some other books I've read. Until then, have a lovely day. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Bye-bye, VOD watchers.